Now the second half of this discussion should feel really similar to the first half. This time, however, we are subtracting polynomials. So instead of adding them together, we're going to subtract. Now subtraction is where most students make the most mistakes. So I want to go ahead and show one step that I highly suggest everybody does when they do any subtraction problem. So the first step I usually do, or I tell students to do, is to write a little -1 in front of that minus sign and then distribute or multiply a -1 into every single term. So that just means I'm going to rewrite this first problem. So I'm going to keep it as 11x squared and then plus a 3x and plus 1. And then I'm going to rewrite the second, and notice I'm not putting parentheses in, so I've got -2x squared, because -1 times 2 is -2. Now -1 times 2x is -2x, and -1 times 8 is -8. Now, I'll show a future problem why that's really, really important and why I suggest it, but usually what happens is people forget to subtract at least one of the terms, and it messes them up, and it's hard for them to find their mistake. But generally, when you distribute this negative sign in, you make less mistakes. So at this point, now that I've distributed, now I'm going to go ahead and add. So I'm just changing it to an addition problem by distributing that negative sign in. So 11 plus -2, these both have a square on them, would be a positive 9x squared. And then the ones with x's, so I'd do 3 plus -2. You could also think of it as 3 minus 2. It would give you a positive 1x, or just x. And then last but not least, we've got our 1 plus -8, which is -7. And then it's in standard form, meaning the biggest exponents first, so we are done. All right, let's go to another problem. So same idea for this one. This one has a good example as to why my first step is important. I'm going to explain it before we distribute. You'll notice that this exponent is a 3, this exponent's a 2, but there's no just x in the first, or term with just an x to the first in the first parenthesis, but there is in the second. So what tends to happen is people forget that they are subtracting the 4x, and they just write down plus 4x rather than a minus 4x. But you avoid that mistake if you write a 1 right here, and then you distribute a -1 into all of these terms. So a -1 times 3x squared, a -1 times 4x, and a -1 times -5. So once again, I'm going to rewrite the first one. So 4x cubed minus 2x squared plus 5. Notice nothing changed. And then all you're really doing in the second one is you're switching signs. So this is -3x squared minus 4x, and the -1 times -5 switches to a positive 5. And then we're going to go ahead and combine like terms. So there's no other term that has a exponent of 3, so I'll write 4x cubed. We have two terms that are squared, so I'm going to add those together. So remember, I'm adding now when I get to this step. So -2 plus -3 is -5x squared. And then I've got this minus 4x, so I'm going to write that down because there's no other term that has an exponent of 1. And then last but not least, I've got the 5 plus 5, because remember I'm adding. 5 plus 5 is 10. And there's your answer. And just remember to double check, because standard form is important. You need to make sure you're going down by one exponent, or at least it's going the biggest exponent first all the way down to the lowest, which I am, so we're good to go there. All right, let's do another one, and then the last one I'll have you guys, I would suggest you try. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute -1 in. So I'm going to rewrite 5x to the 4th minus 2x squared minus 1, and I'll distribute. So -1 times x squared is -x squared. Negative 1 times negative 7 is a positive 7. And then negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. And then I can go ahead and start combining like terms. So this one has a 5x to the 4. That's the only term with an exponent of 4. So I've got 5x to the 4. The next biggest exponent are the squared exponents. Remember, this is a negative 1x squared. So I'm adding, and just to recall, we're just adding these. So negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3x squared. Then we've got this plus 7x. There's no other term, that's just where the x is to the first power. So I'll write 7x down. And then our last two terms, we've got the negative 1 minus 1, or negative 1 plus negative 1, which is negative 2. And we have it in standard form, meaning the biggest exponent first, so we're good. Now before I do the next one, might be a good idea to pause and see if you can do it before I show you how to do it. But if you don't pause, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right to it. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute the negative 1 in, which means I'm going to rewrite the first one. We've got 9x cubed plus 3x squared minus x, so that stays the same. I'll put a 1 in front of that, minus x. And then I'm going to change this to minus 7x cubed, and then a positive 7x squared, and a minus 5. And then let's combine like terms. So 9 plus a negative 7, so we're adding them, gives me a positive 2x cubed. The x squared terms I can add together, so 3 plus 7 is positive 10, and that's x squared. And then we've got this minus 1x. The 5 doesn't have an x, so I'll just bring the minus 1x down. And the minus 5 also comes down because there's no like term for that one. And that should be your final answer.